So, welcome to the latest episode of the MoneyWise UK podcast. I'm George, your host, and today I'm delighted to be speaking with Ben Yearsley. Ben and I met a few years ago when we both showed up to a fund manager meeting in jeans and t-shirts, which at the time certainly when I was turning up, made me stand out. And then I met Ben, and actually, I think we found kind of a little bit of a sort of friend at these meetings. Ben's had a fascinating career. He's spent, I think, and he'll correct me if I'm wrong, 14 years at Hargreaves Lansdown, leaving in 2012, and he now runs his own consultancy business, Fairview Investing. So I just want to just have a conversation with him, and let's see how that all goes. So welcome, Ben, and thank you for joining us.
And it was 15. I just hit, I think it's 14 years and 11 months, I think. So
we'll take that.
My one and only job interview.
Job interview.
I don't think I've ever had another interview. I think that's the only one I've ever really had.
Okay. So who was your interview with?
It was with Sean Kingston, who sadly passed away 5 years ago. He was fascinating. Sean he was my first boss. Yeah, old school. He used to work for Gartmore back in the day, and an HL for a long time. He was a fascinating character. But yeah, sadly passed away of cancer. I think in 2020 we had a very, very good COVID wake for him.
Right.
Observing all the rules, I hasten to add.
Yeah.
Good. Yeah, honest.
Good. Can we perhaps just kind of actually, I'm going to ask you a question. Did you always want to go into financial services, or did you have kind of other ambitions at the time?
Mainly finance. You know, when I was at school, we had all these careers, but we were just talking before we started recording, and I went to Backwell, where George's daughters went to school, and we had this careers library, and I remember opening up there was a book back then, obviously, because we're talking the dark ages, and you flick through and, you know, what are you interested in? And I always wanted to be a stockbroker, not really knowing at that point what a stockbroker actually was, thinking it was really exciting, cutting edge finance. You know, bear in mind this was 1988, 89, when I'd been 12 or 13. Yeah, I think Gordon Gekko had just come out. Not that I could have watched Wall Street then, because it was an 18 film. But Wall Street had just come out, I think, a couple of years earlier, and you'd had the big bang. I was fascinated by it. My dad was a bank manager, so he used to buy shares all the time. I used to follow them and picked up an interest from that. So finance was always what I wanted to do. And then I switched to law, thinking I could be a lawyer because I quite like talking, as you might find out today. And then I spectacularly cocked up my A-levels, so law wasn't really an option. So I went back to finance. Well, I think I would have always ended up in finance anyway. I think law would have bored me, to be perfectly honest. So yeah, a long-winded way of saying yes, it's always been money, accountancy, finance, investment, that's always that way inclined.
So in terms of like your journey with Hargreaves, I mean, obviously if someone is listening to this from Bristol, they'll be familiar with Hargreaves, and I think it's fair to say that there was probably a lot of hard work. It was quite innovative at the time, and then obviously it was floated, and so for many people it changed their lives quite a lot. Can you kind of tell us your experience from kind of when you first came there, what happened, and how your job sort of progressed?
So I started on the help desk, as everybody did back then, virtually, and there were like 100 people, and I started as a temporary 3-month contract to see whether they liked you and you liked them. And I think it was only about 3 weeks later when, going back to Sean Kingston said to me, I think you seem to fit in well, do you want a permanent job? Now, at the time, I think this was 97, I think I started on something like 12 grand a year or something, which at the time, first job out of uni, I was 21. I started with a hangover because my sister got married 2 days before I started. Arguably, nothing really ever changed in the following 15 years. But yeah, I started on the help desk, and it was fascinating. So I sat on the desk. There were about 10 or 12 on the help desk then, and I sat next to Sean and just absorbed information. You literally on day 1, day 2, right, phone rings, pick it up and find out what the client wants. Now, it's so different these days. You get structured training and learning, all that kind of stuff. But that just, right, pick up the phone, learn, ask a question if you don't know the answer. And I think you very quickly learn, especially if you're sitting next to Sean, who was really knowledgeable, that you don't need to ask twice. You ask once, and if you don't pick it up, not great kind of thing. And so you kind of, you learn really quickly. I found it fascinating. And you could be talking about, tax on, back then it was PEPs, or lack of tax on PEPs, or what are the ISA allowance, what are the PEP allowances, what's a TESA, all these things that probably a lot of people listening to, unless they're our age, even younger, may not have, heard of TESAs and PEPs even. I found it fascinating. Yeah, and then I get bored very quickly, and not bored. Well, no, bored is probably the right term. I've got a short attention span, and I was nagging Sean a lot to go and right, what can I do? How do I progress? What do I do next, kind of thing? And I think to just keep me quiet, he just used to chuck things at me and go, right, go and write this guide. And I wrote a guide to, it was all the time of building societies getting taken over. And I think I can't remember what it was. I've got it lying around somewhere. The guide to building societies and things like that. And then I did an investment trust guide, writing all about investment trust. This was all like 98, 99. And then a guy called Rob Hudson, who has been a recurrent theme through the last 25 years, actually, in various guises. I sat next to him for a while, and he used to cover VCTs, and he left to go and set up Egg, another thing that a lot of people of our age might remember. It's Prudential launched this digital bank called Egg, and Rob left to go and do that. And I just said, I'll do the VCT stuff. That looks quite interesting. And that kind of morphed for the next 12 years, actually. And that was, again, end of 98. So I'd been there a year. And back then, you just picked things up and ran with them at HL. And I think that was the fascinating thing about it. I'll do that. That looks interesting. And then that kind of set me on the road to doing like investment research, marketing, not yet PR, which I've done a lot of over 25 years, but that came a bit later because Mark Dampier joined late 98, around that time. And for some reason, he kept on asking me to help him with things. Oh, yeah, that looks interesting. And then eventually, a year later, end of 99, Peter said to me, do you want to go and work with Mark permanently, doing research and PR? And that was that. So I was like end of 99, so it was like, I think it was even Christmas Eve 99 when Peter asked me, but it was, I was 23, I think it. And then started working with Mark start of 2000, doing investment research, PR, writing, video interviews. We pioneered. I like the fact, going back to what you said, HL was very pioneering, and hopefully now it's been taken private, it will get that spark back again. It'll be interesting to see how it does. It's very difficult being a public company, I think. You asked a question recently, by the way, but I'm just rambling now.
No. It's interesting because I think you're right, and that you're right in that it was very pioneering, wasn't it? In that, it was very paper based, obviously at the time. I mean, people listening to this, I mean, you talk about books and but it was you applied, you got your application through the post, you applied through the post, or you.
I mean, we sent out 500,000 magazines. I think it was New Year, Christmas New Year, 99, 2000. We sent out like 500,000 magazines. That's bonkers. You think about it now. I mean, they still send out the Investment Times now. I don't know how many people get it these days, but I think 500,000. Those numbers are ridiculous when you think about it.
The returns must have been good to have afforded to have done that. I guess because it was pioneering, they did have kind of first mover advantage, didn't they? Really, is that?
Yeah, they took. It's funny enough that you look back at the history of HL, and Peter's book's quite entertaining. I do get a mention clearly in there because so important. I think he just put me in there to shut me up and then make me buy a copy of it. But there were some key points, I think, when Shell's dominance was challenged, and we're talking like late 80s, sometime in the 90s, and even the early 2000s. And HL responded. They responded initially by it was all back in the 80s, all about giving commission back, so rebating some of the commission, and then you move on to the next stage. You don't charge any initial commission at all, and then it was all about the renewal commission and things like that, and then rebating some of the renewal commission. Again, all these things are alien now. But HL, every like 5 or 6 years, somebody would come, or a challenger would come in, try and disrupt, and HL would respond. And you'd have a year when profits dipped and not as strong, and then it rebounded again because it was just a great marketing machine, and it still is. And it was a big innovator. HL launched. It's funny enough. One of the guys who was in charge of the early HL Internet, I noticed recently he launched his own. He did his own IPO on the stock market a couple of weeks ago. A guy called Andrew Webley, and he was in charge of the internet for a good 5 or 6 years, developing it and everything. And again, that was like 2000, 2001. It's fascinating. And he's just IPO'd his smarter web company.
And it is interesting, isn't it? Is I think that kind of whole innovation and actually when people look at it and how it built, I do wonder, like, it must be quite hard that, you were, I mean, even I look at this, when you left, you were still young, and you're still young now. And like, you put so much into it, and then you left in, I think, 2012.
Yeah.
And so how did that kind of feel, like, as you've been part of a team that had shaped everything, and
I
then you
should,
just
should have
left?
left earlier.
Okay.
I
Okay.
should have left 2 years earlier, I think, in hindsight. I was coasting. I think Peter knew that, Mark knew that. And I was coasting for the last probably, maybe not 2 years, but a good 18 months, because I wasn't being challenged. I think that was the problem. And I was just getting bored and slightly agitated, and probably slightly disruptive, actually, as well. So leaving was at the right time. And arguably, it should have been early. And it was nice to walk. I was 30, what was I, 36 when I left. As you say, young, and I had no real plans. I had a couple of potential job offers on the cards, but I hadn't made my mind up. And myself and Emma went off and had 7 weeks in the States, which was nice. And again, it's 2012. I didn't have an iPhone, didn't have a smartphone, so actually we had 7 weeks with no communications virtually. Again, it's weird. It's only 13 years later. But it's weird to think that, Blackberries were all the rage. I love my Blackberry. Blackberries were all the rage back then. But, it was a work one. I had to give it back. So I just had this Nokia, whatever, 6610 or something. And it was lovely. We drove coast to coast. It was a really chilled out 6-7 weeks, drove from LA to Miami. It's very boring in the middle, by the way. Don't do it. Fly from, once you've hit the Grand Canyon, bypass the next week and fly, because that bit's really dull. But it's really chilled out. And I came back. It was the Olympics, so we came back at the beginning of August because I had an invite to go to the beach volleyball final, Horse Guards Parade. So we thought, better come back for that. And then about a few weeks later, I better think about, at the end of August, I better start thinking about a job potentially. And I had two very interesting offers. One was with Rob Hudson, going back to him from like 13 years earlier. I won't say the other company, but it was a financial advisory firm, quite a big one, and the chief exec was a good friend of mine. And they were interested in pushing press profile and all that kind of stuff, which would have been the easy route. But I wanted something different. Going back to, not the boredom at HL, but well, I suppose it was boredom. I needed something different, and hence then pitching up at Charles Stanley to launch Charles Stanley Direct with Rob Hudson.
So, I kind of pick up quite a lot that not that you get bored, but you want to move on, and you kind of do things. And I know that kind of in conversations that we've had, I'm going to put this down as kind of a mini Dragon's Den, but I know that you kind of sometimes invest in other companies and other businesses. And can you kind of explain why you do that? And perhaps, have you seen success? Have you seen disappointments, and what you've learned and things like that?
Can we talk about Hugo? You had Hugo on a couple of weeks ago. So I invested a reasonable amount into Hugo's business, Nuisance, who was on was it 2 weeks ago or 3 weeks ago on the podcast?
2 or 3 weeks ago, yes.
Unfortunately, that didn't quite work out, which is things I like Hugo, and I like the product. And I think with any investing in private companies, it has to be a good product, and you have to have a good entrepreneur behind it. Now, that's no guarantee of success. And I've had, I do lots of these because I do them all via EIS, enterprise investment schemes, a very tax efficient way of investing in unquoted businesses. And some have done very nicely. And there was an interesting AI audit business that sold out last year after about 4 years, and I made like 3 or 4 times my money on it. Very nice. Other ones are much longer burns. So, as George knows, I'm a big investor in a brewery called Powder Keg, which is based just outside of Exeter. And funny enough, it's the husband and wife who set it up. The father-in-law, or the John's father-in-law, is in our industry, and someone I've known for a long time. Used to work for an IFA firm in North Somerset, funnily enough, who are now a client of mine at Fairview. So there's all these links, kind of thing.
Yeah.
John, Chris introduced me to John and Jess, his son-in-law and daughter, and John had such a passion for beer. Who doesn't like beer? I'll invest in some of that, and over the next 9 years, I've continually invested, and I don't know what the exit route is, but it's a really nice business. John knows what he's doing. He's growing at a time when a brewery a week is closing. He's survived COVID. He's survived all this. Is self-financing now and all that kind of stuff. And it's really interesting. I mean, that's one I've just invested in this literally 2 weeks ago. Completely different, called a business called You Are the Star, which is children's books, but where you put your kids into the books. and it's bringing it to another level. And I met the guy, funny enough, who had a meeting on the beach in Cornwall about 3 weeks ago, because he lives down there and we were down there for Easter. And Toby lives down there. So we had a meeting on the beach, which is quite cool, actually. You know,
Yeah, I like that.
In our flip-flops and shorts, sun was out, just chatting about his business, and which was really interesting. So I've invested in that, and I've tried out the product. Ida got her book this week or last week, and she loves it. You know, she's into gymnastics. Their unique bit, for example, which is the bit I liked, was they've tied up with lots of sports teams. So there has to be something in all these businesses that gives it an edge. You are the star business. They've signed up hundreds of sports teams. So you can have your own, they haven't done Bristol City, but, whatever. But, you can have your Chelsea book, or you can have your whatever book. Ida's got a gymnastics book that's sponsored by British Gymnastics. And another friend has just invested, who you know as well, and he's done a badminton book for his daughter because she's into horse riding and things like that. And so I like these things, but they're all, beer to kids' books to, I was looking at an AI one recently. And some, you don't put huge amounts of money in, and some want a bit more advice. So Toby, I had, got kids. So I was having a really good chat with Toby about the process of when he gave me a couple of samples to try out. It's kind of, well, that didn't work very well. My daughter says you need to do X. Oh, that's good feedback. So it's quite nice being able to feedback and actually shape, even if you're only making kind of smallish investments in some of these things. But some go bust. I had another brewery that really pissed me off. Shouldn't have gone bust. I won't say who. To this day, I still think there was fraud involved. And it's so frustrating when there's a good product, inept management. And that's the frustrating thing, when you don't mind things going bust, but for the right reason, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
And I guess due to fraud or ineptitude, that's really frustrating.
And I guess that's the danger with all of these, is it doesn't matter how much research we do or whatever we look into. There's sometimes just things that go against us, isn't there? And because that's kind of
COVID killed a lot of, that created problems for so many businesses. The economy being shut down. The brewery, Johnsbrook Powder Keg, could have gone bust during that period. It could well have done. I put some more money in, as did a few others at the time, because just to tide it over. And he got through it. And actually, John pivoted Powder Keg to doing a lot more home deliveries, for example. Especially in the Exeter area, he was doing free deliveries to certain postcodes, things like that he hadn't been able to do before. But then COVID hit, and the pubs are closed and the restaurants are closed. So he had to come up with a new. And that's when you see those kind of troubled times, when you see the good, you can split out the good and the, I won't say bad entrepreneurs, but you know what I mean. You can
yeah.
think, right, we've got a problem. How do we solve it? And how do we push the business on?
And I guess that kind of, I mean, that's interesting, because I think you're right. Is one of the questions I've got here is, like, as an entrepreneur, business owner, what have you learned from your experiences?
I'm not an entrepreneur. I wouldn't.
Would you not?
No, not at all. No.
No.
No, I don't. Gav and I have got our Fairview business, which is great. So Gavin Haynes used to run Whitechurch in Bristol. We just set up our business. We're not entrepreneurs. We enjoy investing.
Yeah.
A bit like you, with what you're doing, we enjoy it, and it's a lifestyle business. We've got no intention of growing it to a massive entity to sell on or anything else. It's something we both enjoy doing, seeing fund managers, investing, meeting economists, and then helping advisors put their solutions together.
Do you think that there is, because that's interesting, so because it's funny, isn't it, is that you can run because I struggle with what I have, which is kind of, I don't know, consultancy. It's a business. I'm not an entrepreneur. And kind of what you're saying is it's almost like you don't have to be an entrepreneur to have your own business. It can be a lifestyle. You can just be a business owner. Or
I put people like Hugo down, and also Henry's dad. So you had Henry on last week. So Henry's a governor at my daughter's school, where I'm chair of governors. So bit of context there, but so Henry's dad set up his fire safety business. Now he's an entrepreneur. Hugo's an entrepreneur, setting up. I'd say I'm a business owner. I'd say you're a business owner, George. I wouldn't say the pair of us are entrepreneurs in that sense.
And so I guess that's the thing, is that, because I was going to say, because you get this kind of feeling that entrepreneurs have to be quite ruthless. I don't know if they can be born or grow into it, but perhaps it is very different, isn't it, to somebody who just like yourself or myself kind of running a business, isn't it? Do you think that they have to be I mean, if you look at Hargreaves Lansdown and Peter Hargreaves and things, is that do they have to be quite ruthless then to be that sort of person, do you think? Or
I think you have to be quite ruthless to grow it as big as something like that, for example. I do think you have to be born, I don't think you can teach entrepreneurship, really. You have to have, there's something innate, I suppose, you need inside you for it. I don't think, I like investing. Investing is not entrepreneurship. That's the difference. I like backing entrepreneurs, and I like meeting them and working out whether I want to put my own money, and sometimes client money, but not really, but it's mostly my own and friends into them. And that, I find that bit interesting. I don't know if I could be asked with actually setting up a proper business and trying to grow.
yeah,
It's a big. I mean, you had Hugo on, and Hugo, talked about his mental health and issues and all that kind of stuff. It takes a toll on you, that kind of thing.
yeah,
And I like the easy life. It's nice. I'm lazy.
yeah.
I'm lazy.
And I think that's, I mean, I think that's quite honest, isn't it? Is that, and maybe it is a lifestyle thing. It's about, because somebody did ask me, would I grow my business? Would I employ people? Would I? And I don't.
That's what you want to do.
Well, and that was my view. It's like, I've got to find people that would be able to do what I do, and then I'd have to manage them. I don't know. And for what purpose? What?
Gav and I, when we set up Fairview, we both had the same. He approached me and said, would you like to do this as a business? I was already doing what we're doing for a couple of IFA firms, and Gav was just leaving Whitechurch, or just left, and said, do you think there's an idea in this, just the two of us joining? I was, yeah, why not? And we both have the same idea on it. It's lifestyle business for both of us. We don't work 5 days. Well, some weeks we work 5 days a week. But as I said, I like going down to Cornwall. Gav likes going away and following England cricket abroad. The one rule we kind of had was that either of us could veto clients. If we don't like someone, we're not working with them because we don't need to. And it's a nice position. And we've had it twice. Once we didn't get offered the contract, but we would have turned it down if we had done, because we both came off this call going, what the hell was that on? And the other time we were offered it, we came off this call, and I phoned Gav and said, I don't like this for whatever reason. And he was, I agree. So it's funny. It happened twice. In both cases, we agreed. There was no debate, but we have got that kind of, that's one thing we agreed on. We have a veto. If we don't like someone, if we don't like a client, we're not going to work with them. It's as simple as that, which is, again, quite a nice position to be in, that you don't have to, we didn't have to go, we set up the business just as COVID hit. Our first client signed up April 2020. But it was like we didn't have to chase business. We didn't have to go, oh, Christ, COVID, what are we going to do? It was a nice, steady, low start that's built up and built up over like the last 6 years. But we don't want to grow it massive. We've got 7 or 8 clients, and that's pretty much it. We don't want hundreds of clients.
Yeah. I guess that's the thing, is that, it's almost like setting what you want, what gives you the life that you want, and then kind of working around that, isn't it? I guess it is where you sort of come through. And I guess one of the questions I've got in my head is like, from a societal point of view, like, this is around success and happiness. And it would be quite interesting to know how you kind of view, because you could have walked away from Hargreaves. I'm assuming you had kind of the share options and everything like that. You could have walked away. You could have done what perhaps others have done and started a business and kept going and building on that. So kind of where do you see success and happiness, and what drives what you do?
Good question. I think you're right. I could have walked away. I would have been bored. I mean, that's the thing that drives me. I can't do nothing. I'll take that back. I can lie around on the TV, on the sofa, watching cricket all day, or I can watch sport on TV all day. If the house is quiet, I does at gymnastics for like 3 hours on a Saturday afternoon. It's great in the winter. There's always sport on. It's wonderful, or cricket in the summer. So I can, I sit around doing absolutely sweet FA for a whole day watching sport. And it was funny, what drove me in 2012 was after leaving HL in the end of May, beginning of June. And then we flew off to the States, I don't know, 20th of June, something like that. I needed a break. It wasn't burnout or anything like that, but HL was intense, and I lived it to the max, always out, London lots, seeing journalists doing stuff, always out in Bristol. And actually, it was nice to just completely switch off. And then by the end of the summer, though, the boredom had kicked in. I was thinking, I can't do this. And again, funny if it happened again when I left Charles Stanley in 2015, I didn't quite know what I was going to do next, and I had about 6 months off. And then funny enough, I did set up a business with an ex-HR colleague, actually, so I'd forgotten about that. I did say it was a proper business as well, Wealth Club, which is doing very well. I haven't been involved for a long time, but again, I had like 5 or 6 months off, is piddling around, and the boredom. That's when the boredom set in, and that's the thing for me. It's the boredom, doing nothing. So I suppose happiness, going back to your question, is being able to do what you want, having the ability to do what you want when you want. Fine, I can't do it completely. We're, daughters at school, so you're tied to school terms and dates and all that kind of stuff, so you haven't got complete freedom. But within those kind of confines, there is a lot of freedom to do what you want, and actually doing a job you enjoy. And both Gav and I, the reason I still do this, because I actually enjoy. I like seeing fund managers. There's lots of arrogant tossers out there in the fund management world, as you well know, but you don't see them if you don't want to.
No, it's true.
You don't, you're not forced into seeing them. I like seeing fund managers. I like finding out what's going on. I like asking, and I'm always happy to meet. I like meeting fund managers that I wouldn't normally invest in, because you never know when you might have made a mistake, or you might turn up someone that you'd written off for whatever reason. They might have moved to a new company and suddenly they click because they fit in with the culture of that business, for example.
Yeah.
Or even the other ad, fund manager you really like, and suddenly they set up on their own. I'm not going to go down that route of you know who. And move to a different firm, and it doesn't work out because, again, the culture doesn't fit for them or whatever. And I enjoy it, and that's why I carry on doing it, because I really enjoy, which is nice, because you don't need to retire in that sense.
Yeah, you can just keep it going and kind of at your pace.
Yeah, I mean, Gav's 5 years older than me, so he's 6 years old. He's 55, and he's got the same view. He enjoys meeting fund managers and doing this. What he didn't want to do anymore was run a business. Going back to what you were talking about, he didn't want to employ staff. He didn't want to run a business, and we don't run a business. It's our business. There's not much to run. We don't have an office. We don't have staff. We have an accountant to deal with the accounts. It's straightforward, and we've got quite a good. Stuff he picks up sometimes because I can't do it, he'll do it, vice versa. We both work on holidays, but it's because we don't work 9 to 5, 45 weeks a year. You don't mind doing a bit when you're away on holiday, doing calls, doing a bit of writing, whatever.
And I guess one of the things is I guess happiness, success kind of work together. And you've kind of touched on it a lot. You've talked about your daughter, your partner, but how you spend time between Bristol, Cornwall, obviously your involvement in investments. How do you balance it? How do you think about it? How do you kind of, how do you get what you want out of everything?
It gets slightly more challenging when your kid's a lot older than mine, or my daughter, but it gets more challenging as child gets older, doesn't it? Just fitting in their lifestyle. Luckily, Emma sorts out most of either stuff. It does get. It's just managing. I'm in one sense quite organised. My diary. I know my diary. I plan my diary for the following couple of months, and I know when I'm in Cornwall, I'm not putting. I cut back on things, but I know when we're not in Cornwall. That's one of the parts. No, I wouldn't say it's part of the deal, but for me, when it's not school holidays, work comes first. So I need to do client meetings, or I need to go to London. I do it, and I'm lucky that I can do that because Emma obviously deals with everything else, school life and Ida's social life and all that kind of stuff. But the flip side of that is that when Cornwall comes for like 12 weeks a year or whatever, I cut back on that. And so it kind of, having Gav as a business partner, he gets that, so he knows school holidays and whatever. Whereas he likes going away watching cricket in the winter. But he's going off to Australia later in the year. I am as well actually, but at the same time. But he's going for about a month, so I'll pick up most of the slack then, work-wise. So it's just a very natural. I've never thought about a balance between work life.
Yeah.
But there just seems to be a natural balance to it, I would say. Somehow,
Yeah.
I got lucky. I'm just, I think I walk on water. I think probably.
Yeah. And I think that's nice, isn't it? Is that I think sometimes people drive, which again is kind of what you said about, the difference between a lifestyle and an entrepreneur, isn't it? Is that, if you're
not an entrepreneur, I'm an entrepreneur, definitely.
Yeah. Because you'd be just driving yourself all the time, wouldn't you? And it would almost be that things get sacrificed to get to where you want to get to, I guess, whereas you've got this lifestyle business, however, if that's the right term, but you're able to then
It is like I said,
balance it with the family, which is, I guess, really important.
yeah, and seeing friends and everything else. And I'm driven in one sense that I enjoy what I do. And I know I happily sit there doing writing stuff as you probably do as well in the evening, watching TV. Ida's going to bed, Emma's putting Ida to bed, and I'll sit down watching TV. And I might be writing a piece that I need to write, a press release or just some investment commentary. I'll happily sit there on the sofa at 9, 10 o'clock at night, whizzing off emails, doing some writing. So no, the next morning I'll hit the gym at 9 o'clock. I don't do meetings before 10 o'clock, by the way. You probably know. Up that for Game of Soldiers. I get up, and that's deliberate. My working day starts at 10 o'clock, for example. I do calls occasionally. That's a good thing about Zoom and Teams and stuff. Is that, when you're doing fund manager meetings with Australia or Far East, I'll sit there in my pajamas at 8 o'clock in the morning, quite happily doing a Zoom call.
Yeah.
Then I'll have a couple of hours when I go off and do the gym and swim and exercise and whatever. It flows. I can't believe actually the business is 5 years old now. It just flows.
And it's a nice business, isn't it? I mean, I think kind of, it's in a way, I was talking to someone of how, like, when I used to manage investments for the financial planning firm I worked for, it took so much time. And so actually having someone like you that plugs into a business means that they still got the kind of feel of something very personal, but actually they've got someone else who's doing it for them.
Yeah,
So
exactly. And it works nice.
coming to the end of this is that it'd be interesting actually, because I think kind of listening to your whole journey.
I'm not sure people have got much out of this somehow, but I don't know.
I don't know. I've enjoyed it. I think it's been fun. I think what you've done is kind of it's that what I wanted is something that's quite real, quite normal. And I think that people maybe have ideas around maybe someone who's come out of Hargreaves, what's that meant and everything. But also, like, I think even this discussion around business owner, entrepreneur and stuff, I think that's been really interesting. And also that kind of how you kind of are able to balance stuff. And, I've got down here is like, what do you think looking 10 years ahead, what would you like to achieve? I might be wrong, but I think that you're just quite happy with what you're doing. And actually 10 years doesn't really come into what you think. And I guess maybe
the only thing about 10 years is Ida will be just finishing school in 10 years.
Okay, that's a different stage, isn't it?
Yeah, so she'll be just finishing school at that point. I don't. It's like, right. Actually, I don't think I know. I meander through life, I suppose, which is quite nice. I don't have any set. Going back to the early question, the only set plan I ever had was actually I really enjoyed. I didn't know what the investment world meant at the time when I was at school. But the fact I was looking at stockbroking, accountancy, all these kind of numbers-based things. I'm glad I wasn't an accountant. God, I would have been bored. My brother's an accountant. Oh, God, no. That's just, day-to-day bores me senseless. But I like numbers. I like maths. Maths was always my best subject by a long way at school. And I suppose that everything probably stems from that love of maths when I was, from probably the age of 3 or 4 onwards, I suppose.
Yeah.
But yeah, I just meander through life, which is quite nice actually. It's nice to be able to do that, and there's no pressure. There's no the most stress we had. We had Ofsted at school, so I'm chair of governance. I said it Ofsted in a couple of weeks ago. That's quite stressful for the school. Less so for me being chair of governance, but that's quite a stressful experience.
Yeah.
For a lot of people. Actually, they were really nice, to be fair. I thought they were. You hear all these horror stories about Ofsted in the newspapers and everything. The 2 guys that came were really nice, really pleasant. People get bad press, don't they, for no reason, I think, sometimes.
I think you're right, is that everyone gets bad press, don't they? Particularly if they're kind of doing well and kind of,
We don't that's an interesting point, going back to the entrepreneur thing.
Yeah.
We definitely have this culture of knocking success, don't we, in this country?
Yeah.
And I always think, why would you bother being a Peter and Steve, like Hargreaves Lansdown in this country? You'd rather do it in the States or somewhere like that, where they actually celebrate those who've created businesses rather than knocking them down. And we just have this, I don't know what it is in this country about that. We just don't seem to like success.
Yeah, because I think in the US, you can fail. And that's not seen negatively, isn't it? It's many people fail before they're successful. Whereas over here, if you fail, it's kind of seen quite negatively, isn't it?
Yeah, it is actually. It is. And yeah, in the States, it's kind of, okay, you move on. What's your
Yeah.
next business idea?
Yeah.
And then you end up being Elon Musk.
Yes, yeah, that's true. Yeah, it's very true. Kind of coming to the end of this, and genuinely, I just found it. I know that we've kind of just sort of flowed between things, but I found it quite fascinating. And hopefully, people who listen to this will find it fascinating. I'd be interested actually, because in my head I've got how you'd answer this, but I don't know, I might be wrong. If you could share one kind of piece of advice with people listening to this, what would that be?
Absorb knowledge, think and ask questions. Looking at COVID, one of the sad things about COVID, if you were starting your working life in 2020, 21, 22, probably most jobs, not most, a lot of jobs, you've been working from home, stuck in your bedroom, stuck in whatever. And that's not a way to learn anything, I don't think. So I look back at my early days, either, probably the whole career at HL, actually. I started off next to Sean Sean Kingston. Then I sat next to Mark Dampier for a long time. And regardless of what people think of him over the whole, he's still a friend and whatever. I was 10 feet away from Peter Hargreaves. I used to speak to Steve a lot, Lansdown a lot. He's a Barry, who was the marketing director, most underrated person in HL. And I used to ask questions. And I think that's the most important thing, is to ask questions and absorb knowledge, because that's the way you learn. And I think the whole working from home thing, it's okay when it's like, for you and me, it's brilliant, isn't it? You can sit in your pajamas, we can do our Zoom calls, do some writing, and you can chill out and relax. But we're, I'm 49, no, I'm not. I'm 48, birthday in a few weeks' time. 49 in a few weeks' time. You're a couple of years older than me. We've learned lots of our stuff, but we're 2/3 of the way through our career, working lives. I think starting out, nothing beats asking someone next to you on the same bank of desks, in the same room, in the same office, if you don't understand something. I think COVID killed that for a lot of people starting work. And I think it's good, actually, that a lot of the work from home stuff is now ending, actually, because I think you don't learn if you don't ask. And if you're not sitting next to someone, you can't ask questions so easily.
Yeah, and I think that's just such a great place to sort of kind of end this, really, is that, and kind of takes us right back to that starting point that you said, being on the help desk. And
I loved it. I did genuinely love my time at HL, because it was so much fun. We were the centre of the universe for UK finance, and I was kind of, when I was working with Damps, and I loved it. I'm a social person. I liked going out, and I was out all the time, enjoying myself, working, meeting people, doing things, because that's just me, I suppose. And it was fun, actually.
Honestly, I've really enjoyed it. I think there's lots that come out of it, and there's lots that I think, that last bit of advice kind of about absorbing knowledge, asking questions, I would always say that as well, is that, I maybe put myself down quite a lot in that I'm not, qualification wise, I don't have a lot of qualifications, but what I do.
So we go to the same front. Well, you go to a bit less these days, but going back to the scruffiness.
Yeah.
I like the fact you were scruffy, because I'm equally, if not worse than you. I turn up in shorts and flip-flops. You go to the lunches that we go to, fund manager lunches, how many people really ask questions? You ask questions, I ask questions, maybe one or two others. How many people just sit there having their lunch, and you go, what's the bloody point in turning up? Don't ask anything. So to this day, I still believe in asking questions.
Yeah. But I think that's the only way that you're ever going to learn something, is to ask the questions. And I think, someone listening to this is I think they should take inspiration from what you said, is look, you can, whatever you view success as, learning and asking is great. So Ben, thank you so much for your time.
Good.
Everyone who's been listening, thank you for tuning in. We've got more episodes coming. So please like, follow, rate, share the podcast. Until next time, thank you very much.